Do you know what happens in heaven this Divine Mercy Sunday when someone down here honors their departed loved ones the way Saint Teresa of Jesus described? Not just any way, not with good intentions that drift away before the day is over, or with a sentimental memory that fades before it ever takes root. The specific, deliberate, and truly effective way that she put into writing, and that most Catholics have never come across. Today is that Sunday, and your loved ones are where they are, waiting for something that only you can give them. The question is whether you know exactly what that something is, because Saint Teresa explained it, and what she explained looks nothing like what you are probably doing. Divine Mercy. Sunday is not an ordinary Sunday. The Church did not place it where it stands by accident or as a piece of decorative devotion. It was placed there because on that day, something happens that does not happen at any other point in the entire liturgical year. Something that touches not only the living, but those who have already gone and who still belong to the body of Christ. Saint Teresa of Jesus didn't know this Sunday by the name we use today, but she understood with extraordinary depth what the mercy of God is capable of doing in those moments that the Church marks as times of grace. And she left behind, with a precision that still astonishes, a clear account of the specific acts a living person can offer that reach a departed soul in those moments. Right now, write the name of that loved one you are carrying in your heart today in the comments, because what you are about to hear was kept for you and for them. And subscribe to this channel, because the teaching of Saint Teresa of Jesus is a map no one should travel alone. What comes next? You need to hear all of it. To understand why Divine Mercy Sunday holds the place it holds in the Church's calendar, we have to go back to the very heart of Easter. Not to the surface of the celebration, not to the external rituals we all recognize, but to what the resurrection of Christ actually means for time itself and for grace. When Christ rose from the dead, he did not rise for himself alone. He rose by throwing open a door that had been closed to all humanity up to that moment. A door that opens onto a mercy that is not a divine emotion, but an active reality, a force that works in the world and in souls with an effectiveness that no human force can match or measure. The octave of Easter, the 8 days following Easter Sunday, is the season in which the Church celebrates that opening. 8 days that, liturgically speaking, are one single day. One eternal day of grace that culminates in Divine Mercy Sunday. The Church did not establish that Sunday out of sentimental devotion. It established it because the mercy of God poured out in Christ's resurrection reaches, in that moment, a liturgical expression that carries a specific weight within the year. It is not that God is more merciful on that Sunday than on any other. God does not change. He has no better days and no worse ones. It is that the Church, as a mother who knows her children and understands how the human heart works, marks that moment as a special time of grace in which the soul that draws near to God encounters a response that is available throughout the year but takes on a particular density on that Sunday. Like the sun that always shines, but whose rays, at certain moments, fall at an angle that warms in a way no other angle can produce at any other hour of the day. Saint Teresa of Jesus did not know Divine Mercy Sunday by that name, nor was the feast formally established in her lifetime. All of that came to the Church's calendar centuries after her death. But Saint Teresa of Jesus knew something that lies at the very root of that Sunday with a depth few have matched. She knew the mercy of God. Not as a theological concept to be studied and explained, but as a living, personal, urgent experience that runs through every page of the book of her life and the interior castle with an intensity that still moves people today in ways they did not expect when they first opened those books. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew that God's mercy is the foundation of every prayer of intercession for the departed, because without that mercy, no human prayer could ever reach those who have already gone. no act of honor would carry enough weight to cross the boundary that death draws between this world and the next. It is God's mercy that gathers what the living offer with love and carries it to where souls need it most, with an effectiveness that comes not from the one who offers, but from the one who receives the offering and transforms it. And here, something emerges that Saint Teresa of Jesus emphasized with an insistence her Carmelite sisters always remembered when they spoke of her teaching on the departed. God's mercy does not operate in a vacuum. It operates through forms, through concrete acts performed by the living with faith, with love, and with deliberate intention. Through the Mass, through vocal prayer offered with genuine recollection, through personal sacrifice offered with someone's name held in the heart, through a work of mercy done for a neighbor with the intention placed on someone who can no longer do anything for themselves, God could liberate every soul in purgatory in an instant without requiring anyone's participation. But He does not do it that way, and Saint Teresa of Jesus was not unaware of why He does not. He does it through the communion of saints, because that participation of the living in the destiny of the dead is itself an act of love that forms part of God's eternal plan. We are not dispensable intermediaries that God tolerates because He has no other option. We are part of how God's mercy reaches those who need it, because God has willed it to be so from the beginning. This means something that completely changes the way we understand what we do when we honor our departed. It is not an optional gesture we add to our life of faith when time allows. It is a responsibility that the communion of saints places on our shoulders, with a tenderness that does not crush but rather lifts, and that gives meaning to things that might otherwise seem like nothing more than pain without purpose. Your departed loved ones need you, not because God is insufficient without you, but because God has willed that human love form part of the path by which His mercy reaches them. And that path, on this particular Sunday, carrying the full weight of the Easter octave, is more open and more receptive than at any other moment of the liturgical year. Saint Teresa of Jesus taught her sisters that the times of grace which the Church marks must be embraced with an intensity that ordinary times do not demand with the same urgency. Not because God's grace is scarce, or because He is stingy with His mercy outside those seasons, but because the human heart is easily distracted and forgetful, and it needs moments that wake it up and orient it forcefully toward what truly matters: divine mercy. Sunday is one of those moments, a moment the Church has marked, and that the saints have recognized as an opportunity that does not come again in the same year, and what you do in it for your departed loved ones, with the disposition and the concrete acts that Saint Teresa of Jesus taught with such precision and clarity, carries a resonance that goes far beyond what you can imagine from this side of life, where everything is seen in part and where faith supplies what the eyes cannot reach. But Saint Teresa of Jesus never stopped at general principles when she taught something about the spiritual life. Never. When she spoke about prayer, she brought it down to earth in acts her sisters could carry out that same afternoon. When she spoke about mortification, she turned it into something with a name and a shape that could be put into practice that same morning before breakfast. And when she taught about the departed, she did exactly the same thing. She turned the doctrine into acts, concrete, precise, achievable acts for anyone who had faith and love and the will to get moving. The first of those acts is the one that surprises people most when they hear it for the first time. Not because it is complicated, but because it is exactly the opposite of complicated, and yet most of us have never done it the way Saint Teresa of Jesus taught. Praying for someone seems the most natural thing in the world for a Catholic who has grown up inside the faith. From childhood, we learn to pray for the departed, to include them in our evening prayers, to ask God to receive them into His glory when we light a candle or pass by a cemetery. It is a habit of love that the Church has cultivated in her children from the very beginning, part of that living memory that connects the living with those who have gone, through the invisible thread of prayer. But Saint Teresa of Jesus made a distinction that very few people make, and that completely changes the spiritual weight of every prayer offered for a departed soul. The distinction between praying in general and praying with directed intention. Between including the departed in a broad, diffuse prayer that covers them all without naming any one of them, and naming just one specific person, with their name spoken inwardly with as much presence as the soul can bring to that moment. That difference, for Saint Teresa of Jesus, was not a minor nuance or a spiritual refinement reserved for advanced souls. It was the difference between a prayer that barely grazes the surface of what it could be, and a prayer that penetrates to where it needs to go to produce the effect God wants to bring about through it. In The Way of Perfection, Saint Teresa of Jesus speaks about vocal prayer with a depth that surprises readers who expect that book to contain only practical instructions for beginners in the life of prayer. For her, vocal prayer recited with genuine attention and deliberate intention has the power to become, without the one praying planning it, forcing it, or seeking it directly, contemplative prayer. Not because the words carry a magical force that operates independently of the person who speaks them, but because when the soul turns to God with truth, with the heart genuinely placed in what it is saying and in who is saying it and toward whom it is being said, something happens in that communication that transcends the words themselves. Something that Saint Teresa of Jesus recognized with the clarity of someone who had experienced that transition many times. The words become a channel, and what flows through that channel does not come from the one praying, but from God Himself, who gathers the sincere intention of the soul and transforms it into grace that works where it needs to work and reaches whom it needs to reach. When that intention is directed specifically toward a departed person, when the praying soul places that person's name at the center of the prayer and offers it with clarity and love, without scattering into other intentions or diluting it in pious generalities, the prayer takes on a direction that makes it more effective. Not because God needs precise instructions to know whom to send the requested grace to, but because the clarity of the intention reflects and expresses the clarity of the love. And clear love, the love that knows exactly what it wants and asks for it without ambiguity and without embarrassment, is the love that Saint Teresa of Jesus identified in all her writings as the most powerful engine of the spiritual life. Vague love produces vague prayer. Precise love produces precise prayer. And precise prayer reaches in a way that vague prayer cannot, even when the exact same words are spoken in both cases. The first act of honor that Saint Teresa of Jesus taught for the departed is exactly this: the prayer of intercession offered with a name and with deliberate intention. Not the rosary recited out of habit while the mind runs through the to-do list for the rest of the day. Not an Our Father tacked on at the end of evening prayers like an afterthought completed out of custom. A prayer that begins with the name of the departed, spoken inwardly with as much presence and attention as the soul can gather in that moment. A prayer that says, plainly and without the spiritual shyness we sometimes mistake for humility, "This is for you. I am offering this specifically for you. This is what I can give you from this side, where I still am, and you no longer are. And I give it with all the love I have and with full confidence that God receives it and carries it to where you are." Saint Teresa of Jesus practiced this with a concreteness that her sisters in the Carmel remembered with a mixture of wonder and recognition. When someone asked her to pray for a departed soul, she did not add that person to a mental list to be run through quickly before sleep. She placed them. She placed them before God with all the intention her soul could gather in that specific moment, holding the name of that person in her heart, the way one holds something precious that must not be dropped. And she taught her sisters to do the same. to resist the temptation of generic prayer that covers many intentions with little depth, and to prefer concentrated prayer that covers one intention with every ounce of depth available. Because that depth is exactly what distinguishes the intercession that reaches from the intercession that stays at the surface. But here, Saint Teresa of Jesus always added something that sets her teaching apart from a mere prayer technique one might find in any spirituality manual. Directed intention is not enough on its own if it is not accompanied by trust. Living, active, concrete trust that the prayer being offered genuinely reaches where it is directed. Trust that God receives it with an attention that has no distractions, no off days, no moments when He is occupied with more important things. Trust that the departed person for whom you are praying receives something real, something that actually changes something in where they are, as a direct consequence of what you are doing here in this moment. That trust is not spiritual presumption or certainty that the departed is already in heaven, or an assertion that what you do is enough for everything they need. It is faith. The simple and powerful faith that says, God can do this, He wants to do it, and I ask Him with an open heart, trusting that He does. This divine mercy. Sunday, when you prepare to honor your loved one with this first act of intercession, begin with the name, only the name. Speak that name inwardly with all the clarity that love can summon. Let that face appear in your heart. Let that memory come with its full force, without pushing it away or rushing past it. And from there, from that place where love and faith meet in the name of someone who matters, direct your prayer. Not like someone throwing something into the air hoping it lands somewhere, but like someone extending a bridge with both hands, knowing with the certainty of faith that on the other side, someone is waiting for what is coming. There is a scene that repeats itself in the life of Saint Teresa of Jesus, with a frequency that is not accidental and cannot be explained simply by the personal devotion of an extraordinarily pious woman. Every time someone died near her, every time one of her Carmelite sisters passed away after years of shared life in the cloister, or someone she knew crossed into the next life under circumstances that moved her deeply, the first thing Saint Teresa of Jesus did was not to weep, though tears came, because she had a heart capable of loving with an intensity you can feel in every letter she ever wrote. It was not to write about death, though death always led her to meditate with astonishing depth on what lies beyond and on what awaits souls when they cross that threshold. The first thing she did, the first thing she sought with an urgency her contemporaries noticed and found striking, even among people accustomed to living close to her, was the Mass. She sought to have a Mass offered for that soul. With a promptness she herself explained in several of her writings, with a clarity that leaves no room for ambiguous interpretation or softening that might drain the teaching of its real force. For Saint Teresa of Jesus, the Mass offered for a departed soul was not one among several possible acts of intercession, an item on a list where every item carries roughly the same weight and can be swapped out depending on the circumstances or a person's practical situation. It was the highest act of honor a living person can offer to one who has died, not because she had decided this through personal conviction born of her own spiritual experience, but because the Church has taught it since her earliest centuries, with a consistency that has survived every era and every theological debate that has shaken the Church throughout its history, and because Saint Teresa of Jesus had understood that teaching with a depth few people reach when they are not content to know the doctrine from memory, but insist on letting it pass through the living experience of prayer and contemplation until it becomes alive in them. In the Mass, it is not human prayer that is offered to God, however fervent. It is not the effort of a soul that seeks God with sincerity and love. It is Christ Himself who is offered, the very sacrifice of Calvary made present at the altar, not as a repetition, not as a symbolic representation, but as a real actualization of the one sacrifice that has the power to open heaven and transform the destiny of souls. And when that sacrifice is offered with the specific intention of intercession for a departed person, what reaches that soul is not the amplified echo of a human prayer. It is the redemptive force of Christ's sacrifice in person, directed toward them by the mercy of God, who gathers the intention of the one who offered that Mass and turns it into grace that works wherever the sacrifice of Christ works, which is everywhere and in all times, without exception. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote, in the book of her life, something her readers have quoted for centuries because it holds a truth the heart recognizes immediately upon hearing it, before the mind has time to process it theologically. She wrote that she had seen in the visions God granted her regarding the state of souls after death, the effect that Masses produced on those who were in purgatory awaiting the purification needed to enter the presence of God. She had seen souls who had been going through that purification for some time receive a relief that nothing else could produce with the same speed or the same intensity. A relief experienced as a genuine lessening of the purification they were undergoing, a shortening of the road still ahead of them, a light suddenly drawing closer with a speed that was not proportional to the time that had passed, but to the grace received. And that vision did not leave her tranquil or satisfied at having had an extraordinary spiritual experience. It made her more urgent, more active, more insistent on obtaining Masses for the departed, for whom she felt spiritual responsibility, personal affection, or simply the compassion she felt for any soul that needed what she could help provide. In her own words, Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote in the book of her life that the sacrifice of the Mass benefits souls greatly. A statement that, in its brevity, contains everything you need to understand why this act of honor is the highest you can offer your departed loved one. She does not say it helps a little. She does not say it is a pious gesture God looks upon with benevolence. She says it benefits greatly, with the direct, unadorned conviction of someone who is not repeating a learned doctrine, but describing something she has seen work with her own interior eyes in the experience of contemplation. This divine mercy, Sunday, if you can only do one thing for your loved one, let it be this: go to Mass and offer that Mass for them with deliberate and explicit intention from the moment you take your seat. If you are able to ask your parish priest to celebrate a Mass with that specific intention, you have set in motion something that Saint Teresa of Jesus would have recognized immediately as the most powerful act of honor a living person can perform for someone who has gone ahead. There is nothing you can do from this side of life that carries more grace to where your loved one is than the sacrifice of Christ offered for them with deliberate intention at the altar of the Church. And here, something closes that was left open from the very beginning of this journey. The question of why Divine Mercy Sunday amplifies these acts of honor in a way other Sundays cannot match. The answer is not that God operates differently on that day or that the laws of grace change according to the calendar. The answer is that the Church, by marking that day as a special time of mercy, with the full weight of tradition behind it, creates a confluence between the grace that flows from Christ's sacrifice in every Mass and the grace that characterizes this particular Sunday within the liturgical year. Two currents of mercy meeting at the same point, together producing an effect that separately they would not produce with the same intensity or the same fullness. The Mass offered for your loved one this Divine Mercy Sunday carries the incomparable weight of Christ's sacrifice, plus the density of grace that this Sunday adds to every act of devotion performed on it with faith and love. It is the highest act of honor at the highest moment of grace in the entire liturgical year, and you have access to it today. There's a word that appears in the writings of Saint Teresa of Jesus with a frequency that makes modern readers uncomfortable, a word that produces in many of them an instinctive resistance they cannot always explain, but feel clearly every time they come across it. A word our era has learned to view with a mixture of suspicion and pity. as if it belonged to a darker and less enlightened form of Christianity than the one we prefer to practice in a time that has elevated comfort and well-being almost to the level of sacred values. That word is penance. And Saint Teresa of Jesus did not use it with embarrassment, nor did she build around it a spirituality of suffering for its own sake, a spirituality that finds in pain an end in itself and confuses self-inflicted suffering with holiness. She used it with a clarity that dismantles every misunderstanding the moment you grasp what she actually meant by it and from what conviction she lived it. For Saint Teresa of Jesus, penance was an act of love, not a punishment the soul inflicts on itself to pay past debts with a currency of present suffering, not a display of religious fervor performed for the benefit of the sisters sharing the cloister who might otherwise judge the lukewarmness of someone who does not mortify herself with sufficient visibility. A pure, deliberate act of love that consists in taking something that costs the body or the will, something one would normally keep for oneself without a second thought, because it is a legitimate pleasure, or a well-earned rest, or a comfort the body naturally craves, and freely offering it to God with a specific intention that gives that cost a destination and transforms it completely. When that intention is the intercession of a departed person, when the renunciation is offered explicitly for someone who can no longer do anything for themselves from where they are, penance becomes one of the most powerful acts of honor a living person can perform for one who has gone ahead. Because what is being offered is not words that cost little, it is something that genuinely costs. And what genuinely costs carries a weight that what costs nothing can never have, no matter how beautifully it is dressed in lovely feelings and sincere intentions. Saint Teresa of Jesus lived this in the Carmel with an intensity that was not spiritual exhibitionism or a competition for holiness among the sisters, but deep conviction born of years of prayer and direct experience of what mortification does to the soul when it is offered from love rather than from fear. The mortifications she and her sisters practiced were not ends in themselves, carried out because the rule required it, and fulfilling the rule brought peace of conscience. They were means, concrete and effective means of union with the suffering Christ who gave his body out of love and who taught his disciples that genuine love does not remain in words, but takes on flesh in the cost one is willing to bear for the one they love. Means of intercession for souls that needed grace they could not earn for themselves. Means of intercession for the departed who depended on the generosity of the living to receive the relief that the purification of purgatory could not give them as quickly as the love of someone still on this side could provide. But here, Saint Teresa of Jesus always made something clear, with an insistence that reflects how many times she saw people misunderstand this teaching and turn it into something she never intended. The penance she proposed did not require extreme gestures or spiritual heroics beyond the reach of an ordinary person living a normal life with real responsibilities and a body that has limits to be respected. It required something that is at once more difficult and more accessible than dramatic grand gestures: the voluntary, conscious renunciation of something genuinely desired, offered with real love and with deliberate intention, directed toward someone specific. It might be fasting from a meal the body is calling for. It might be giving up that moment of rest in front of a screen that had been planned as the day's reward. It might be getting up a little earlier than the body would prefer, to give that extra time to prayer for someone who needs it. What matters is not the size of the sacrifice as measured from the outside by someone observing it. What matters is that it be real for the one making it, that it genuinely cost something in that particular person in that particular moment, and that it be offered with the departed person's name held in the intention with the same clarity and deliberateness that Saint Teresa of Jesus asked for in the prayer of intercession. This third act of honor has a dimension that prayer alone does not have, and that the Mass, as exalted as it is, produces in a different way. When you pray for your loved one, you offer your words, your attention, the time you give to being present before God. When you offer penance for your loved one, you offer your body. And that offering of the body carries, in the spiritual tradition that Saint Teresa of Jesus inherited from the Church and passed on in full force to the sisters she formed, a particular weight that the spiritual traditions of every age have recognized. Saint Paul understood it this way when he wrote to the Colossians that he was completing in his own flesh what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ for the sake of his body, which is the Church. Not because Christ's sacrifice is insufficient, but because Christ has willed that the members of his body participate in the work of redemption through their own bodies, their own flesh, the real cost they assume out of love. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood it this way when she taught that mortification is not the destruction of the body, but its consecration to the service of the most demanding and most fruitful love that exists. This divine mercy. Sunday, after having prayed for your loved one by name with deliberate intention, and after having offered or arranged for a Mass to be said for them, add something that costs. You do not need to invent anything extraordinary, just something real, a fast from a meal, the giving up of something small that you genuinely want, time you choose not to spend on yourself and instead put at the service of prayer. And as you offer it, place your loved one's name in that offering with the same clarity you brought to the prayer. Tell God that this too is for them, that this too you are giving so that He may carry it to where they are and turn it into what they need, with the mercy that this Sunday pours out on everything offered with love. Saint Teresa of Jesus held a conviction that runs through all her writings with a consistency that admits no exceptions and no softening that would make it say something other than what it says. A conviction her Carmelite sisters came to recognize as one of the most distinctive marks of her way of understanding the spiritual life, one that sets her teaching apart from any form of spirituality that retreats into the interior world as an excuse to neglect the world outside. That conviction is this: that love of God and love of neighbor are inseparable, not complementary in the sense of two distinct virtues that a well-formed soul cultivates side by side. Inseparable in the strongest sense of the word. Where one is absent, the other cannot truly be present, however much it may appear to be. And where one grows, the other grows too, because they spring from the same root and are fed by the same source. In the interior castle, Saint Teresa of Jesus returns to this conviction again and again, with an insistence that leaves no room for the comfortable evasion of someone who would prefer the spiritual life to be an entirely interior affair, with no need to step into the discomfort of other people's needs. There are souls, she writes, who believe themselves to be quite advanced in prayer and closely united to God, yet are incapable of stepping outside themselves to attend to a neighbor when that neighbor needs them with a concrete need standing right in front of them, impossible to ignore without something breaking in the soul that ignores it. And that incapacity, for Saint Teresa of Jesus, is not a minor flaw that a little more spiritual practice will correct. It is a sign that the interior journey, however impressive it may appear from the outside, has not yet arrived where it believes it has arrived. Because genuine contemplation does not enclose the soul in itself like a glass dome from which it observes the world with serene detachment. It opens it outward with a generosity it did not previously possess, one that cannot be feigned, forced, or produced artificially. It comes on its own as a natural consequence when the soul has truly touched God and has understood in that experience that God loves everyone standing before the soul with the same love with which He loves the soul itself. From that deep, lived conviction, the fourth act of honor that Saint Teresa of Jesus taught for the departed has a logic that connects it to everything that came before, not as a juxtaposition, but as an integration. It is the act of almsgiving and the work of mercy performed in the name of the departed and offered to God with the explicit intention that that act may benefit the soul of one who has already gone. Not as a religious transaction operating on the logic of a spiritual marketplace, where one pays a price here to obtain a result there through the automatic mechanics of something that never fails, but as the expression of a love that has grown so large it no longer fits within the interior space of prayer and personal sacrifice and needs to spill outward into the visible world, into the concrete faces of concrete people with concrete needs right now. When you perform a work of mercy in the name of your loved one, two movements happen simultaneously, movements that Saint Teresa of Jesus understood as part of a single gesture of love, extending in two directions at once. First, the love you hold for your departed loved one becomes visible in this world, takes shape in something with real consequences for a real person living here who receives something they needed. Second, that outward act of love, offered deliberately to God with the intention of interceding for one who is no longer present, becomes an offering that God's mercy can gather and direct to where the departed person needs it. The person who receives the alms or the work of mercy here receives something that does them good in this visible world, and the departed person for whom that act is offered receives something that does them good in the dimension where they now are. One single act of love with two real recipients in two distinct dimensions of the same reality that God sustains entire with His mercy. Saint Teresa of Jesus did not teach this from the tranquil abstraction of someone theorizing about love without having practiced it to the point of exhaustion. She lived it with a concreteness that her biographers describe with repeated astonishment. In the foundations she established with a health that was never robust, and in several periods of her life was frankly fragile. In the endless journeys along the roads of Castile, through summer heat and winter cold, with discomforts that would have stopped someone with less conviction, in the relationships she maintained with people of every state and condition who came to her seeking guidance, consolation, or simply someone who would truly see them, there is a constant that cannot be missed: her absolutely concrete attention to the absolutely concrete needs of the absolutely concrete people standing before her at each moment. She did not love humanity in the abstract. She loved this person. She did not help her neighbor in general. She helped whoever had a need now with whatever she had available now. This divine mercy, Sunday before the day is over, find someone with a real need. It does not have to be a visible or grand gesture, seen or celebrated by anyone else. It can be small, quiet, done in the privacy of someone who knows that what they do before God, and that is enough. A practical form of help for someone who does not have what they need. A word of genuine presence to someone passing through a loneliness that no one else seems to notice. A visit to someone who is not expecting anyone to come. A forgiveness you have been holding on to longer than would be good for either of you, which today, on this Sunday, when God's mercy is poured out with unmatched generosity, you choose to give because the mercy you are calling on for your departed loved one is asking you to be merciful as well with those close to you. And as you do that act, offer it. Give it the name of your departed loved one. Tell God that what you are doing for this living person in need, you are offering also for the one who has gone ahead, who needs your love in a way your eyes cannot see, but that is just as real as the need of the person standing in front of you right now. There is a mistake that Saint Teresa of Jesus observed repeatedly throughout her life in people who had genuine faith, real love for their departed, and a sincere desire to do something for them that went beyond sentimental remembrance. People who prayed, who offered masses, who made small sacrifices with their intention placed on those who had already gone, and who, despite all of this, performed every one of those acts from an interior place that robbed them of a significant part of their effectiveness. Not out of bad intention, not out of lukewarmness or carelessness, but from fear, from guilt, from a dull, persistent anxiety telling them without pause that their loved ones were suffering greatly, that they had not done enough for those people during their lifetime, that perhaps they could never do enough to make up for everything they had left undone when it was still possible to do it. And that anxiety, though it arose from love and expressed a real love, was not the love that Saint Teresa of Jesus recognized as the driving force of truly effective intercession. Because the intercession that reaches the departed with its full force and full weight, according to the teaching that Saint Teresa of Jesus distilled from her own spiritual experience and from the Church's doctrine, which she had passed through contemplation until it became alive in her, does not arise from fear or from guilt. It arises from trust. Trust in the mercy of God, which is greater than all the sins and all the debts and all the insufficiencies the human soul can accumulate over an entire lifetime. Trust that God wants your departed loved ones to reach Him with a loving urgency that infinitely surpasses any urgency you could feel for them from this side. Trust that every act of intercession you offer today, however small it may seem in comparison to what you imagine would be enough, is gathered by that mercy with an attention that has no distractions, and carried to where it needs to go with an effectiveness that depends not on the size of your act, but on the immeasurable greatness of the God who receives it. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew from her own direct personal experience, not from theory learned in books, what fear does to prayer. In the book of her life, she describes periods of her own spiritual life when she approached prayer from a place of dread and doubt that robbed her prayer of the openness and trust that make it fruitful. Periods when she prayed, but prayed hunched over, drawn into herself. Periods when she sought God, but sought Him as one who fears God might not want to be found by her. And she also describes, with a gratitude you can feel in every line of those pages, the moment that changed. The moment she understood, not merely intellectually, but all the way down to the deepest part of her being, that approaching God in fear is approaching Him without yet understanding who it is you are going to. That God is not a judge, patiently waiting for the moment to pronounce the sentence that sin deserves. He is a father waiting with a love-driven impatience for the moment the child who strayed returns home, who runs out to meet the child before they arrive, just as in the parable Jesus told, so no one could ever confuse the face of God with the face of fear. When you honor your loved one this Divine Mercy Sunday, do it from that place, from trust, not from the certainty that they have already reached heaven and that everything is fine and they need nothing more from you, because that certainty is not yours to have, and pretending to have it would be a way of stopping your intercession while it still matters. But from the certainty of faith that God loves your loved one with a love that surpasses everything you could imagine from this side, and that every act of honor you offer for them today is received by that love with a generosity that neither measures, nor calculates, nor compares what you receive with what you deserve. Do not pray in anguish. Do not offer your sacrifice with a heart constricted by guilt over what you did not do sooner. Offer it with the open heart of someone who knows they are placing something in the hands of one infinitely more capable and more merciful than themselves. And trust. Trust genuinely, not as a spiritual formula repeated because it sounds right, but as an act of faith that says, God knows what He is doing with what I am giving Him, and what He does is always better than anything I could have imagined. Saint Teresa of Jesus added to this teaching on interior disposition something her sisters found especially consoling in moments when grief weighed heavier than hope. She said that God's mercy has a particular inclination, a special attention, toward those who intercede for others. That the soul which steps outside itself, spending its prayer and its sacrifice, not on its own needs, but on someone who needs what it can offer, finds in that generous stepping out a grace that prayer centered on oneself does not produce with the same abundance or the same promptness. Interceding for the departed does not only benefit the departed, it transforms the one who intercedes. It opens them in dimensions that were previously closed. It makes them capable of a generosity that was before only an aspiration, and which, having been exercised, becomes a permanent part of who they are, an enlargement of the heart that remains after the specific moment of intercession has passed, and makes the person who interceded different from who they were before. Sit for a moment in silence after you have offered the 4 acts of honor that Saint Teresa of Jesus taught. Not to analyze whether you did it well enough, not to measure whether it was sufficient, not to compare what you offered with what you imagine your loved one needs, but to allow God's mercy to do its work without you trying to oversee it, to trust that what you placed in His hands is being carried exactly where it needs to go, and to receive for yourself something of that same mercy that this Sunday pours out on all who belong to the body of Christ. Those of us still here and those already there, united in that body which no death can ever truly divide. But there is still one final piece. It is not another act to add to the list. It is the key that holds everything together and determines whether what you have done this Sunday carries the full reach it is capable of carrying. The answer to the question you may never have dared ask aloud about what truly happens when a living person honors a departed one the way Saint Teresa of Jesus taught. There is a question that Saint Teresa of Jesus answered in a way her Carmelite sisters never forgot. A question that many Catholics carry inside without daring to ask it, for fear that the answer will be a disappointment or a silence or a theological evasion that leaves the heart exactly where it was before. The question is this: what actually happens when we pray for our departed? Not in terms of general doctrine repeated from the Catechism, in concrete terms. What happens there, where they are, when someone here offers an intercession for them by name, with deliberate intention? Does something arrive? Does something change? Or is it all an act of faith that makes sense only because the Church teaches it, but which we cannot know produces anything real in a dimension our eyes cannot see? Saint Teresa of Jesus did not answer this question with evasion or with the kind of humility that is really spiritual cowardice dressed up as prudence. She answered from what she had seen, from what God had shown her in the visions that run through the book of her life, like threads of light connecting this world to the next, with a certainty that refuses both easy consolation and cowardly denial. What Saint Teresa of Jesus saw and described with the precision that characterized her even when speaking of realities beyond any completely precise description, is that the intercession of the living produces a real relief in the souls in purgatory. Not symbolic in the sense of merely representing something without producing it, not metaphorical in the sense of being a poetic way of speaking of something that does not in fact occur. Real in the fullest and most demanding sense of that word. A relief experienced as a genuine lessening of the purification those souls are undergoing. A shortening of the road still remaining for them to travel until they are completely prepared for the presence of God that awaits them at the end of that purifying path. And in those cases where God's mercy wills it and the fullness of the intercessions offered makes it possible, according to His designs which no human calculation can fully anticipate, as a liberation that carries the soul directly into the embrace it has been awaiting since the moment it crossed the threshold of death. Saint Teresa of Jesus described this not to produce a sentimental comfort in those who heard her that would leave them at ease without requiring anything from them. She described it to awaken in them something far more demanding and far more fruitful than comfort, the urgency of love. Because if what you offer for your loved one has that real effect in where they are, then what you choose not to offer also has real consequences. Omission is not a neutral act that changes nothing. Forgetting is not innocent in the sense of producing no effect in any direction. Not in the sense that someone who does not pray for the departed is guilty of something that determines their eternal destiny. Only God determines that. But in the sense that someone who holds in their hands something that could bring relief to someone they love and does not offer it out of distraction, ignorance, or the comfort of preferring not to think about such things, is letting past something that would have changed something real in the life of someone who matters to them. That urgency of love is the key that unites all the acts of honor Saint Teresa of Jesus taught, which you have walked through today. On this Sunday, the Church has marked as the moment of greatest mercy in the entire liturgical year. The prayer with name and deliberate intention that puts love in direct contact with the one who needs it. The Mass offered for the departed that carries to them the sacrifice of Christ with its full redemptive force. The penance that offers the body as an instrument of love when words alone cannot express everything the heart wants to give. The work of mercy that materializes that love in the visible world and reaches simultaneously toward those who are here and toward the one who is there. And the trust without fear or guilt that opens the soul of the one who offers, allowing them also to receive something of the mercy they invoke for another. Each of these acts has its own weight and its own reach. But what unites them, what turns them into more than the sum of their parts, is precisely this: the love that knows there is someone who needs what you can give and is not content to merely feel it but acts. And here is the promise that Saint Teresa of Jesus left for those who honor their departed with these acts during the times of grace the Church marks. It is not a promise she fashioned from her personal authority, nor an automatic guarantee that functions independently of God. It is a promise that belongs to the living tradition of the Church, and that she lived with a conviction you can feel in every line she wrote on the subject. The promise is this: that God does not leave unanswered the love offered for those who can no longer offer for themselves. That the mercy the living invoke for their departed also returns upon the living in ways that cannot always be seen from this side, but are just as real as the relief they produce in the souls in purgatory. That the love directed toward those who have died in Christ enlarges the one who directs it in ways that are only fully understood when that person has themselves crossed the threshold that today separates the one who prays from the one who waits to be reached by prayer. This Divine Mercy Sunday, you have done something with real consequences in a dimension your eyes cannot see. You have honored your loved one, not with a memory that dissolves before the day is over, but with acts that Saint Teresa of Jesus would recognize immediately as the very acts she herself taught. And your loved one, wherever they are, has received today something that only you could give them in this way, at this moment, with this love. You have made it this far because someone matters to you, because there is a name you carry with you everywhere, and which today, on this Divine Mercy Sunday, has found something more than a memory. It has found 4 concrete acts that Saint Teresa of Jesus taught with the precision of someone who was not speaking of theories but of realities she had seen at work. Prayer with name and deliberate intention. The Mass offered with the weight of Christ's sacrifice. Penance that places the body at the service of love. The work of mercy that spills outward and reaches in 2 directions at once. And the trust without fear or guilt that makes everything else effective, because it opens the soul of the one who offers and allows them too to receive. All of that you have received today. And what you have received is not only knowledge, it is a path that Saint Teresa of Jesus traveled in full and left mapped with enough clarity that anyone who wishes to follow it can do so without getting lost. What you did today for your loved one has real consequences where they are. You will not know it with certainty in this life, but one day you will. And on that day, you will understand that what seemed small from here carried a weight measured only by the mercy of God. which does not measure by the units we use. There is something more that the Church has kept for souls who seek with the same love with which you sought today. Something that Saint Teresa of Jesus explored with a depth you have not yet heard in full. Because the spirituality of Teresa of Jesus is not exhausted in one Sunday or 4 acts or a single teaching. It is an ocean, and each time you go deeper into it, the water is clearer and more profound and more capable of carrying you to places you could not have imagined from the shore. What awaits you in the next encounter with Saint Teresa of Jesus has to do with something she lived through in the darkest moments of her spiritual journey, and which she left written for every soul that has ever felt they are praying and the silence does not break. For those who have loved and lost and are still looking for a sign that love is not lost with the one who goes. For those who need to know that faith is not only a doctrine held together intellectually, but an experience that transforms from within in a way that no loss can entirely undo. May this Sunday leave you in peace. May the name you carry in your heart rest today in hands far better than your own. And may the mercy of God you have invoked for the one you love return to you multiplied. Because that is always how it works with love, that gives without holding anything back.